All right. Well, thank you, the organizers, for this invitation. This is not very much my field. My field is psycholinguistics, but recently, in collaboration with Boaz Kaiser and his group, we have been developing some studies that look at something related to wisdom, more to decision making. So this is now my sentence. I think it's a nice sentence for the talk I'm going to give. This sentence comes from this romantic writer. And this is the question we have. To what extent wisdom can be affected by linguistic context, right? And in this case, let me introduce you the logic. The logic is the following. To the extent that some aspects of wisdom can be addressed by assessing our decisions, to the extent that this is true, then, and if these decisions can be affected by the linguistic context in which a person is set, namely the native language or a foreign language, then the study of wisdom should consider the linguistic context in which decisions are made. So this is a very much contextual situation. So how your decisions may change depending on the linguistic context that you face. All right? And previous studies have shown that, in fact, some biases that we have when we make decisions that are basically prompt by heuristics are reduced when we use a foreign language. So biases such as loss aversion, accounting bias, risk aversion, ambiguity aversion, those biases that in a way sometimes lead us to make poor decisions are reduced when we use a foreign language. Now, we hope, and that's when we started, actually we started this research independently in both labs. We thought that important decisions that are at the core of our being wouldn't be affected so much by a foreign language. And here is what we present today. It's important decisions that involve moral values. Okay, and we are going to confront to a masters or to giants of moral judgment. So we have here Kant and his argument about how one should behave and decide on morality. And then I have another one here, another giant, which is Groucho Marx, that says, if you don't like these principles, don't worry. I have another one. So we're going to see who is right. I see more movies from Groucho than I read books from Kant, but that's a different issue. Okay, so, and the story goes that some people argue that moral judgments appear to be subject to both intuitive and rational forces. And here you have some quotes from Hume. The rules of morality are not the conclusion of our reason. Reason is out only to be the slave of passions, and so on and so forth. And more recently, people argue that the ontology is a natural cognitive expression of our deepest moral emotions. Okay? And you will see the link with the foreign language. And the idea is that some of the deontological judgments that we make based on rules, those judgments are more prevalent when the problem is the context elicits a high emotional reaction. That the question is what happens if you reduce that emotional reaction, and we can reduce that emotional reaction by presenting problems or situations in a foreign language. Because we know that to some extent, from other type of research, using a foreign language reduces the emotional resonance that you experience, right? In many different situations. And here I'm referring to a foreign language, not a language in which you are immersed. So these are relatively mid-proficient bilinguals, the ones I'm going to present here. People that use a foreign language, but they have not been involved in that language, sociologically speaking. And, all right. So this is the information about emotion and foreign language. And this is the first study we performed. We asked participants to respond to this problem. I'll let you read it. I'm sure that you're familiar with it, but. All right. I'm not going to ask you how many of you would switch tracks, because I know that it's about 80%. All right. Now, to the very same people, we present this other problem. and I'm not going to ask you how many of you would push the man, but I'll give you the results. So this is what we found when people were exposed to the trolley. So it is percentage of responses of changing tracks in L1 in Spanish, percentage of responses of pushing the poor man. This is the trolley, of switching. So yes, I would switch, no, I wouldn't switch, right? And this is the same thing that we find when we present these problems in a foreign language to these people. And these are results that people have reported again and again and again. This is nothing novel. That's what we find in the first language about so people don't like to push the man. They say, no, I wouldn't push the man. The very same people that say, yes, I would switch tracks, they wouldn't push the man. And this is what happened in a foreign language, right? So basically in a foreign language, people tend to push the man more often, 30% of the times more often. At the very least, you have to learn something. If you are in a station or you're in the bridge and there's a train there, just avoid being near a foreign language speaker, right? That's an important lesson. Right, so I was very much, that's the wisdom, that's it. Yeah. So any question? That's it. All right. So you see, this was surprising. So people became much more consequentialist or utilitarist when making decisions in a foreign language. There is nothing about English being a foreign language. What promotes is not that English is the language of business, of utilitarian actions, because when you do the experiment in the other way around, so now English is the native language, Spanish is the foreign language, same results for the trolley, for the switch, and same results for the footbridge. So actually, American speakers exposed to Spanish problems, they tend to be more utilitarian. All right, there is an effect of knowledge of the language. So this is this is below average. So we split the people doing the foreign language studying, those that were very good at the second language and those that were a bit poorer. And then you do have an effect that the more you know the language, the more you resemble a native speaker, right? All right, so let me go to the actual study that, was funded by the project. All right, so here it is. We present this situation to the participants. Okay, and here where we're going to test whether people focus more on consequences than intention when punishing people, right? So we present this case, these problems. All right. Then there's an intentional situation in which the boss intentionally makes people, you will see what's the result, okay? But intentionally he tries to do something to make the employees to work harder. And then we have, that was seen by one group of participants. The other group of participants, they saw the background and then their intentional situation. So basically you have an outcome that is going to be negative. I'll show you the outcome now. And a negative outcome, in one case, the boss had the intention to come up with that negative outcome. In the other case, he didn't have the intention. It was an accidental harm. Okay, this is the outcome. Right? So imagine that you're in court and you are presented with this in your native language or in your foreign language. In principle, your decision shouldn't change, right? All right. And then we asked people how much damage did Terrence's investments in the project cost to the employees, how much responsibility, so damage, responsibility, how morally wrong was Terrence, and this is the important thing, how much should Terrence be punished by his actions, being either intentional or unintentional. That's what we get with damage. This is native group, this is the foreign group, black intentional, green unintentional. Basically, there is not much difference between the groups. What is important is the pattern that you will see in the native and in the foreign, right? Now here there's a responsibility. Well, there's an effect of intentionality, a small one, but basically the same pattern in the native and the foreign language. Now, for moral wrongness, it's worse when you do something intentionally than when it's just accidental or unintentional, okay? And what is important is what happened with punishment. So people tend to punish, there is an effect of the native language, you punish more in intentional than in unintentional condition, but this punishment, this difference is much reduced when you do this in a foreign language. You care less about the intention. You care about the consequence, but not so much of the intention. Okay, you are saying, look, you did it, tough luck, sorry, you're going to pay for it. Okay? And we think that this has important consequences for courts and trials, and especially for immigrants that are in a different country. Okay, so summarizing, we found foreign language effects, namely an increase in utilitarian judgments associated with the use of a foreign language. And then we think also that this comes in part because using a foreign language makes you to pay attention more to consequences rather than intentions. Now, we don't know very much why. Okay, we are still playing with the notion of emotion, psychological distance, very, very different aspects that may contribute to this phenomenon of the foreign language. Now, at least what we know is that, or at least I think I was trying to convince you that a nice way to study wisdom, or the wisdom should also consider the specific context in which actions are made. In this case, linguistic context. Okay. All right. We'll skip this. Now, this will be also important for these guys, right? These are politicians in the European Union, that most of them are making decisions in their foreign language. So you wonder why they are so utilitarian, and we are having such a hard time in certain countries. So people want to know all this. This is The Economist and the New York Times pay attention to that, and with Boas, we wrote a piece here in the New York Times, and people got very excited about these results. So this is it. So thank you very much. And these are the collaborators, the Chicago team and the Barcelona team. Thank you very much.
Questions? Margaret.
So I'm from medicine, and in medicine we talk about, that patients have to deal with essentially a foreign language then when they get sick, and they need to make decisions in that new sort of linguistic environment. And I'm wondering if what you're talking about could have implications for not just different, foreign languages, but a different way of conceptualizing foreign language. Does that make sense?
For the patients or for the doctors?
For the patients in particular.
Yeah. Let me tell you about a part of the story that we are trying to do, see whether I captured your idea. So we are trying to see whether some therapies in a foreign language, psychological therapies, for instance, related to fear or to phobias, okay, in a foreign language work a bit better than in a native language because it reduces the emotionality, or some conflicts, family conflicts, whether by using a second language, a foreign language, you could cool down and start speaking. You're not going to solve the problem. You're going to, at the very least, try to start a conversation. And that sometimes this, when you use a native language, it becomes too emotional too quickly.
We face a common circumstance in end-of-life decisions, actually, where the pastor or the spiritual person and the patient are coming from a certain kind of linguistic framework, and they meet up with the scientific language and world of medicine, and the two really have a lot of difficulty communicating.
Yeah.
And it causes, breakdowns of all kinds, and whether that could somehow be mitigated in a way that would actually foster wise decisions is interesting.
It could, I guess. That's the whole idea. Try to bring this, try to understand first which are the biases that the foreign language reduces or increases, and then eventually try to facilitate the context in which you could have a more wise decision or wiser decision. That would be
I think it was really interesting when you have these, that just by using a foreign language where you are not too proficient in it, right? So you come to this more utilitarian decision making. I'm wondering how this compares to how children make decisions. You know, there's this moral development, you know, Piaget and so on, that the children make the decision more literally, where they don't care about the intention. And I'm wondering, if you use a foreign language that you are not so proficient with, does it mean that there's some regress in your moral development?
Yeah, well, this comes in two ways. This question comes often, and it comes in two ways. One is the one you said, and the other one is saying, oh, fine, if you use a foreign language, you become a psychopath. True, I mean, with children, you do have similar effects, that they care more about the consequence rather than the intention. The question is whether the mechanism is the same. Now, and the result looks like the same, but we don't know whether the mechanism is the same. I'm hesitant to say that people using a foreign language become children, as I'm doing now. But yes, the pattern is similar.
I'm wondering, are there neurophysiological studies to underpin your results? It would be, I think, very exciting to have some fMRI studies that actually show that it is primarily the emotionality that drives the effects. Are you aware that anyone has done that?
There are studies on moral judgments, fMRI studies on moral judgments. Okay.
No, I mean with the foreign language.
No, there are none.
Because that would be really interesting. I mean, one
Maybe
confounding,
in the morning.
one.
We will do it.
Well, we are talking here, right? So I think someone is listening. So one concern that I have is there are many, many differences between your mother tongue and a foreign language. You have looked at level of competency and proficiency. However, it is the case that as we have a shorter history with a foreign language in our everyday practices, the networks that words establish in our brain differ fundamentally, and not necessarily does that have to have emotional implications.
Yes, it's not about. Yes, it's not about. I don't think it's the critical issue is going to be proficiency, but rather the way you are using the language. So to what extent you are using the foreign language, no matter how proficient you are in a social context.
And it's not necessarily emotional, that's my point.
It could be.
Maybe a difference in the associative networks that given words have. It doesn't have to be between hot and cold.
Yes.
That's my point.
It could.
It would be great to have an fMRI.
Yes. Yes. Now, having said that, the studies on emotion and were basically the psycholinguistic studies, looking also at some ERPs actually, on emotion and foreign language processing are not the best ones.
Okay.
So we have to start from that.
So someone from Wisdom Out on our live webcast has asked the following question. Do you think a person could use words in a foreign language for strong emotions as a way to reframe an unhelpful perspective?
As a way to what?
Reframe an unhelpful perspective. So basically, if you're not taking a very productive perspective about a situation, do you think that if they use their foreign language, particularly when they're very emotional, would it help them to deal with, to kind of form a new, more successful perspective of the situation?
Yes, the idea, and actually one experiment that we discussed of doing it, is to have a company, okay? And you have, say, 20 people, and they have to make a decision. So you put 10 people in a room, another 10 people in another room, and they have to come up with a decision of one problem and see whether they come up with the same one, and also looking at what type of interactions are there, right? And I mean, sometimes in meetings you could see that people get not emotional, but get kind of distressed. And one way to stop that could be, or to reduce that, could be to have these interactions in a foreign language, in which. And there are two sides here. The one side is that it's true that it's much less emotional to interact in a foreign language, but at the same time, for instance, swear words doesn't sound the same to me So I can swear in English perfectly fine. No problem. And if you swear and you call me names in English, that's okay. If you call me names in Spanish, I'll get very angry. So yes, the question is how we articulate these foreign language effects and whether that can help to reduce situations of conflict, hopefully.